shall we? I'm a 31-year-old female who states away from home on a business trip. About an hour ago, around 8:30 p.m. here, I'd just gotten back to my room from a work dinner. I heard shuffling in the hallway and peeked out the people. I saw a figure seemingly outside the room to the left of mine, looking outward. They were knocking lightly and said twice quickly,
"Hello? Hello?"
Then it sounded like the door opened and closed. I was like, okay, they must have forgotten what room they were in or something, and someone let them in. I walk back to the main part of my room, and I hear shuffling again. I look out again, and I see a figure. I can't really make out what the person looks like, but I see them on the other side of my room this time. And again, hear light knocking, and
"Hello? Hello?"
Now, I'm starting to get a weird, spidery sense of like, what the hell's going on? I see the figure leave and think, okay, that was weird. Then, I again start hearing shuffling. I start walking toward the hotel room door, and I hear a light knock on what sounds like my door. Again, I hear,
"Hello? Hello?"
And immediately after, someone attempts to open my door. Thank God I had the cross latch pulled over, not the deadbolt though. My heart stopped as I stood there and watched the door hit the latch and fall back shut. I called the front desk and informed them that someone had just tried entering my room and I'm not staying with anyone. The front desk attendant just replied, "I don't have any housekeeping up there." To which I replied, "Okay, well, that's concerning. Could you please send someone up to check around?" The attendant replied, "Well, there's no manager on duty." To which I asked if I could call the police instead because I was very worried and I started to cry a bit. She replied that I should do what I thought I needed to do. I hung up and cried for a bit, not sure what to do. I didn't want to ask for another room because I'm too scared to leave now. 10 minutes later, the hotel phone starts ringing. I was honestly feeling really scared to answer, but I did. It was the front desk attendant. She said the police were going to be coming to my room, and she didn't want me to panic when I heard them knocking on the door. I said okay and hung up. I sat there and thought, how do I know this is legit? Whoever tried to access my room had a key. Otherwise, how would the door have actually opened? A few minutes later, as expected, I hear a knock. I looked out the peephole and I saw 2 male officers. I didn't ask to see ID, which in hindsight probably would have been the smart thing to do, but I was so shaken up and not really thinking. I opened the door and they asked what was going on. I told them all that I explained above, and they said it was good that I had the cross latch pulled over because the door would have opened if not. I responded, "It's a hotel. What do you mean? What's the point of the access card then?" I wiggled the handle. We were in the hallway, talking with the door open. Then they took a pause and they were like, "Oh, it automatically locks?" Again, I was like, yeah, it's a hotel. So then they had me shut the door and open it with the key to test it. Sure enough, didn't open without the access card. Then they said it was probably housekeeping. I responded that the front desk attendant told me there was no housekeeping up here when I called. Plus, it was 8:30 p.m. Why would housekeeping be coming by at that time, unless I'd requested that somebody come by? Plus, I noticed housekeeping had already been by during the day because my trash was emptied and dirty towel was gone. They ultimately told me they thought it was housekeeping and not to worry, but if anything else happened or if I felt unsafe, to call them. They also said if I wanted to change rooms, they were sure the hotel would accommodate this. I said okay while crying, and they left. Now I'm sitting in my room crying, laying under the covers in my clothes. I'm sure I won't sleep tonight. I'm also too afraid to change rooms because I don't want to leave this room. I have the cross latch pulled over and the deadbolt locked. I think I'm safe. Am I being paranoid? Was it probably housekeeping? Should I be doing something different? I'm posting an update on this one for everyone. I'm home safe and promptly came down with a nasty bug, slowly crawling out of it. I'm glad I followed my gut and reacted the way that I did to do what I could to stay safe. I was able to speak with the manager the next day when she came in at 11 a.m. Unfortunately, the response from her was disappointing, just like the night shift front desk clerk and the morning shift front desk clerk when I checked out. Needless to say, I will never stay in this hotel again and will be avoiding this large chain as a whole. So I live in a county that was pretty rural until the last 10 or 15 years. The biggest town in our county is pretty crowded now, overcrowded, and I hate it. I moved from there to the countryside. I like where I live, except it can be really creepy at night, because for miles and miles, it's dark and no streetlights. One thing about this county is that the main roads always get backed up real quick. There's an accident or whatever, so it pays to go on the back roads. The back roads, like any other rural place, are less populated, dark, lots of trees, and no sidewalks. Anyway, a few years ago something happened that almost made me stop using the back roads. I was driving home kinda late one night. I decided to take one particular back road that shaved off 10 minutes from my commute home. I was tired and I had to get up early, so I was going fast, trying to get home soon. This road is a little more populated than some, but it's still super spooky in some stretches, because huge trees are alongside the road, and their branches and leaves make a tunnel of sorts. So I'm zipping through and around a curve. Up ahead, I see what I thought was a giant garden flag. You know, the flags that people put up in the springtime in their yards? Well, I thought it was a weird flag because it seemed like it was fairly tall and large, and it was in the middle of the road. As I get closer, my headlights hit it, and it's not a flag. It is a person, a lady. She was wearing a red fez. I live in rural Maryland. You don't just see a fez every day. A long, flowy white dress and an orange reflective sash across her chest. A little strange because she's in the middle of the street. As I drove past her, it got weirder. As dark as it was, as I drove by, I could see that she was about 60. She had glasses, and I could see her bright blue eyes. She looked in my passenger window, and she started doing this weird bounce thing. I thought she was going to try and get in my car. Mind you, I'm going pretty fast. I don't know what it was about her, but she freaked me the fuck out. I didn't think that she would rob me. I really thought that she was a soul snatcher or a skinwalker. I honestly didn't think that she was human. I can't adequately describe how creepy she was. I sped past her as fast as I could. I kept glancing in my back seat to make sure she had not materialized in my car. I prayed, recited scripture, and kept watch in my rearview mirror. It was spring, so a little warm, but I felt bone-chillingly cold. I finally make it home, and I run in to tell my mom the story. I got in just as my brother was telling my mom about this weird lady he saw as he was driving. It was the same lady, but he saw her at the intersection from the highway and the back road, whereas I saw her further down the road. We both had the same reaction. She also tried looking in his car. She was also bouncing around when he saw her. He said that there was a car in front of him that sped off so fast when they drove past the lady. My brother was so freaked out, he won't travel that road anymore, not even during the day. Eventually, I found out that the lady lives in the woods. Apparently, at one time, her family lived on that road. Her father was ill, and she tried to take him to the hospital. He died on the way there, and she drove around with his body in her car for hours. I guess she has mental health issues, and I think she lost the house or got kicked out. I have friends that live off that street, so when I was talking about it, they knew exactly who it was. I still go on that road, but I haven't seen her since. I do hope she's okay, but I really do not want to run into her again. I stayed the night at my best friend's often. I pretty much lived at her house half of the time until I moved states as a teenager. I've had plenty of homes with spirits, but I never minded as long as they weren't malicious. At her house, though, there was something evil in the basement. Every time we had to do laundry down there, we would run and swap loads or grab clothes as fast as we could and run back up the stairs. The atmosphere was so heavy down there. Her room was on the main level and then moved to the upstairs attic later on. Since the house was old, the stairs were creaky, and you knew which stair someone was standing on because they made a particular creak. Well, the malicious energy would walk up the stairs late at night. You'd hear the door open, then hear it walk up each stair to the top. Then it's like it would always just disappear. Well, one night we were up really late. My best friend fell asleep and I was laying in the bed opposite of her, trying to sleep. The attic was dark besides the light in the stairwell. I grew up with horrible insomnia from trauma, so it was pretty normal for me to lay in the dark, just listening. Well, the door opened. Each stair creaked. No big deal. Until the malicious energy went past the top of the stairway, and I heard it walking towards me. Each step was heavier than the last. It walked all the way until it was in between both of our beds. The energy was so heavy. I was petrified. I hid under my blanket, like the 11-year-old I was, until I felt like it had left and I could breathe again. I jumped up, turned the TV on, turned the light on, and climbed into my best friend's bed, waking her up. I'll never forget that fear. It was scarier because it never usually went past the top of the stairway. But of course, when I'm the only one awake, it walked all the way up to me. This probably doesn't sound scary, but it was at age 11. This happened to me when I was about 10 years old. But even now, as an adult in my 30s, I remember it like it was yesterday. My parents had taken my sister and I out to a movie, and then to get ice cream, in celebration of my older sister getting straight A's on her report card. I remember my dad had gotten off of work later than usual, so by the time the movie was over and we had our ice cream, it was well past our bedtime. It didn't matter, though. My parents were happy and proud of my sister. We had a great time, and we took our time getting home. If it wasn't for what happened when we got there, I would have always looked back fondly on this night. We got home around 10:30. Bedtime was usually 10, so I went straight to my room to put my pajamas on while my sister went to brush her teeth. I remember thinking that it seemed a little more chilly in the house that night, but that's the only thing out of the ordinary I can recall from when we first walked in. I barely had a chance to change when I heard my dad yell our names from what I thought was the kitchen. I didn't know what was wrong, but I knew it was bad because I heard fear in his voice for the first time ever. It scared me really bad. I bolted out the door and into the kitchen as fast as I could. My sister was already there, and her and my parents were standing very close. My mom looked like she was on the verge of panic, and she motioned for me to come close. She wrapped her arms around my sister and me, and my dad was already dialing on the house phone. Then I noticed some glass on the floor. I asked my mom what was wrong, but she didn't want to tell me. She said we needed to go outside right away. As we headed out the front door, I heard my dad talking to the 911 operator and telling them that when we got home, he found our back sliding door shattered and objects strewn about the kitchen. We went to the neighbor's house and waited for the police to come. After a few minutes, my dad joined us. He seemed to be well shaken up, which was a new sight for me. The police arrived and searched the house extensively. It was a big scene with all of our neighbors outside and flashing lights illuminating our entire street for hours. They never found anyone in our house. Whoever had been there had come and gone. The thing that gets to me is that nothing was stolen. Whoever it was didn't want any of our possessions. What they did was take our canned food out of the pantry and stack them into small pyramids on the kitchen counter. They also turned on the TV in the basement and moved a few random objects to different parts of the house. Very creepy. It was like an insane person had been in our home and did things for reasons that only made sense to them. As the police were finishing up and getting ready to leave, I heard one of them ask my mom a question. They talked quietly, and I'm sure they thought I didn't hear. I pretended not to be listening, but I heard everything. You see, we kept magnetized letters on our fridge. I think I'd gotten them for a birthday present a few years before, and we used them to leave each other messages for fun sometimes. The cop was asking my mom if the message there, that night, was done by any of us. It wasn't. I watched my mom turn pale when he told her what it said. It still makes my skin crawl to this very day. It said, "Always watching." The police didn't find any fingerprints. They said the intruder had to have been wearing gloves. For the next few days, the entire family was extremely uneasy. I was absolutely positive that the intruder was still in the house somehow, that there was a hidden place that nobody knew about where he could hide and listen to us. I never shook that feeling that somebody was there. Within a few months, we decided to move. It was all just too scary for us to stay in that area. We moved to a house several miles away. We were never bothered again, but I do still think about it. Was it kids playing a prank? Was it some insane person that wanted to torment a random family? Or was it someone that truly had it out for us? And who really was always watching? Could it have been a neighbor, someone we knew? These questions still keep me up at night sometimes. This happened many years ago, but the hairs on my neck stand up sometimes when I'm alone at home, and I have to check the house to make sure no one is hiding. I've always had spooky happenings go on around me. I have multiple stories of seeing shadow people and spirits, and of hearing stuff that was less than natural. I might post about those other experiences someday, but for now, I'll just tell the stories of a demon that followed my family around for a while. I haven't talked about this in years, as I hated how crazy it made me sound. I also don't like talking about it because it tends to make activity start up again. But luckily, no one in my family has experienced these things since I last saw him in 2012. I'll try to keep the stories as brief as possible and only list what details are necessary. But buckle up, because there was a lot of activity for many years. A bit of background. I grew up in a non-denominational Christian household. My dad in particular was a very strong believer. After him, my sister and I are the biggest believers, and my brother's now an atheist, though he was a believer at the time. My mom didn't experience this demon at all. In the house were my dad, my mom, my brother, my sister, and I. My dad was the first one who saw him. It was in the early 2000s, I think 2001 or 2002. My dad was studying to become a commercial airline pilot. He was licensed to fly helicopters and private Cessnas and jets, but he wanted to expand his horizons and challenge himself in a new way. He operated a flight school in our hometown, so he was a busy guy. He used to get up around 4 a.m. to study so that he wouldn't miss or lose any time during work, or during family time after my siblings and I would get home from school. My dog would always accompany him to the dining room, which is where he would set up for the morning. One of these mornings, my dog went to the sliding glass door that led to our backyard from the dining room and started barking like she was going mad. My dad ran to let her out before she woke anyone up, but she immediately started whining and backed away from the door once he'd opened it. My dad, who initially thought she saw a possum or a coyote, as we used to get them all the time in our backyard, told her to go outside to chase whatever it was out in the yard. Usually, she'd tear off like a bolt of lightning, but she just continued to whine and back up. My dad looked out the door to see if he could see what was scaring her so badly, and that's when he saw him. A large, hulking black figure that was moving very slowly, encircling the house next door. As soon as he saw him, my dad gasped and froze. When he gasped, the figure stopped and turned its head toward my dad. He didn't really have a face, but my dad felt his eyes on him. As soon as it looked at him, the words, "strong man," popped into my dad's head. He knew that was what it was called. They stared at each other for a bit, before Strong Man eventually turned its head back forward and resumed his slow march around the house next door. I was only 9 or 10 at the time, so I didn't hear this story until much later, but this does mark the first time anyone in my family saw him. After that, my dad would periodically look out the windows when he was studying to check before he would let my dog out to do her business. And he would see him from time to time. But now, instead of circling the house next door, he would be circling ours. The next person to see him was my brother. At this time, My brother was a typical angsty teenager with an added helping of snark. He was about 14 or 15 and was going through a hard time at school, which made him act out at home. My parents were struggling with how to reconnect with him and were coming up short. One night, my brother was listening to music in his room, brooding over something or other, as you do when you've got more big feelings than you know how to handle, when he saw a giant shadow rise up from the bottom of his window to past the top. He had heard my dad's story by this point and knew immediately that this was what he was seeing. Now, this next part is going to sound ridiculous because, well, let's just be honest, because it is ridiculous. My brother growled at it. Yes, literally growled. As you might suspect, nothing happened. My brother started feeling this really oppressive energy and then said, "You're not welcome here." Strong man didn't move. My brother then said, "In the name of Jesus, leave." He then slowly moved away. Around this time, my sister, at the time 13 or 14, was home alone one night. She was in the living room watching TV when she heard a knock at the front door. She went to go check it, but didn't see anyone there. She shrugged it off and went back to watch TV. She then heard a knock on the sliding glass door in the dining room. Now she's spooked because that goes to our backyard, and why would someone knock on that door? She doesn't get up and look and kind of huddles into blankets trying to hide. Then she hears a knock at the French doors that lead to our backyard from the living room, essentially right next to where she's sitting. She immediately started to pray and then heard knocking coming from all 3 doors at once. We came home to find her sobbing, huddled in a ball of blankets in her room. After this, I was finally told about what my dad had been seeing and what my brother experienced. We don't know if what happened to my sister was because of strongman, but it definitely was intended to scare her. After this, the sightings experiences seemed to slow down, but would always pick right back up if any of us talked about it, either with each other or to an outside party. In 2005, my dad died in a routine flight check. My whole family kind of imploded. My mom went off the deep end into alcoholism and shut down. My brother was away doing his service for the Finnish military, and my sister and I only had each other to cling on to. My sister kind of became my secondary mom and was dealing with the stressors of her senior year of high school and trying to figure out what she was going to do for college. Up until this point, I'd never experienced anything supernatural. I started doubting God and stopped going to church. It wasn't so much that I didn't believe in God anymore, but I was bitterly angry at him for taking away my dad and the effect that it had on my family. My mom decided that we couldn't live in the house that had had so many memories of my dad, so she bought the house next door. Not the one from the beginning of the story, but the one on the other side. I was 14 at this time. As it was right next door, we took our time moving. A few months after moving, I had my first experience with strongman. The house we moved into was a 2-story, and my new bedroom faced our old house and had a wooden fence separating the 2 backyards right underneath it. One night, I was up late reading and my mom was out drinking with some colleagues. My brother and sister were now in college and living in the dorms on campus. My dog was with me in my bedroom, so I felt comfortable. As I was reading, I started to feel heavy. I don't know how to really describe it other than feeling wrong and heavy. I chalked it up to Home Alone jitters and went on reading. As I was reading, I started hearing a scratching on the fence below my window. My dog started growling intermittently, and I'd have to tell her to shush because I thought it was just a possum. As I said before, we got a lot in that area. It wasn't until a few minutes had passed that I started to realize that the scratches were coming in rounds of threes. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Pause. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Pause. So on and so on for a good long while. The feeling of heaviness just increased, and I started to feel some fear prickling along my skin. I closed my book, and the scratching stopped. I waited a minute and didn't hear anything, so I just opened my book back up and kept reading. The scratching started again. I closed my book again, and it stopped mid-scratch. Even though I was feeling far from God, I started praying for Jesus to take away all the evil from the house, to send his light here instead. And I prayed and prayed and prayed. The scratching got louder, the louder I prayed, until I finally said, Amen, Amen, Amen. And the scratching stopped, fully. I couldn't sleep after that. I had to wait for my mom to come home around 4 that morning. About a year or so later, my sister and I went on a trip to Finland to visit my grandparents. While there, I had a crazy dream while I was napping on my grandparents' couch. I won't post the entirety of it unless anyone is interested, but essentially, I dreamed that I was getting possessed and was woken up by my grandma saying I was doing things in my sleep that I felt myself doing in my dream. It was really freaky, and I hated it. Around this time, I also started waking up about 3 a.m. every night. This continued even when we went back home, and eventually just became part of life. I didn't think anything of it until I was telling a friend about my sleep issues, and she told me that 3 a.m. was the demonic witching hour. Cool. After this summer, my mom got remarried to my stepdad, and we moved into his house. His house was in an older part of town, with lots of beautiful Victorians on tree-lined streets. It was picturesque, to say the least. Regardless, this is where most of the activity happened. I have story upon story of different activity happening in this house. But those are better told another time, as they don't necessarily relate to strongman. I did have multiple times when the same feeling of heaviness that accompanied him would just come upon me, and I'd pray him away. I saw him just one time at this house. I was coming home from an evening church service and was about to turn into my driveway when he just rose up, seemingly from the ground, right in front of my car. I thought I was going to hit something solid, but I just drove right through him and turned into my drive. I was so scared to get out of the car, but that overwhelming feeling became too oppressive, and I had to get away. I started praying out loud and ran to my house. I saw him one other time in college, outside of my dorm, when I looked out the window one evening after a late night of studying. He always showed up when things would start to feel normal again, almost as if to say, I'm still here. It was awful. That was the last time I saw him. I haven't had a demonic experience since. Thank God. Sorry this was so long. It just happened over many, many years. I don't randomly wake up at 3 a.m. anymore. I don't get that oppressively heavy feeling randomly either. I hope I never have to experience either of those ever again. have many ghost stories to share that have happened at various points in my life. The first one happened 20 years ago or so. I was staying over at my dad's house for the weekend back when I was 6 or 7. At the time, my sister and brother were living there, so I didn't have a bed. Instead, I was sleeping in my father's room, on the floor, on a big circular cushion. My father's house was eerie, to say the least. I really didn't like being there. The reasons will become clear soon, but I had just gone to bed. My head was facing into the hallway. My father was downstairs, lying down on the couch, watching TV. As I was laying there, I started to hear some odd noises. I brushed it off as my father's cats. No big deal. I turned over to face the wall and closed my eyes. The noises continued, and they were getting louder. I started to get scared, and something was telling me to turn around and look into the hallway. I wish I hadn't. There in the hallway was this black shadow crawling on the floor, coming down the hallway. It then crawled up the wall and onto the ceiling. As any child would do at that point, I pulled the blankets over my head and I closed my eyes tight. When I opened my eyes and pulled down the blankets, the shadow was gone. I knew it couldn't have been cats because, A, cats really don't climb up walls or on ceilings, and B, I came to find out that one of the cats was sleeping on my father's bed. I never really saw that shadow thing ever again. This happened almost 25 years ago, way before cell phones were a thing. When I was 17, my brother, 13 at the time, were traveling in northern British Columbia in mid-November. This is important as the darkness at this time of year in the mountains is absolute. We were in the Pine Pass between Chetwynd and Prince George, BC. Anyone who knows this area knows how desolate it is. I'm talking hundreds of kilometers between gas stations and any kind of people or buildings. We were just about at the Powder King ski resort turnoff, and it was getting late. We pulled into a roadside turnout around 10 or 10:30 p.m. because I was super tired. My brother was already sleeping. I pull in and park near some tourist signage, lock my doors, and put my seat back to sleep. I was dead asleep when something snapped me awake. To this day, I'm not sure what it was that woke me up. I was looking around trying to figure out what was happening, when all of a sudden my car was surrounded by 4 or 5 men. They started yanking on the door handles, trying to get into the car. I'm not sure if they saw that I was awake or not, but I sat up and slammed the car into drive and peeled out of there. I'm not sure if I hit one of them or not, and I didn't care to check. I didn't stop again until my auntie's in Prince George. It was one of the most terrifying times in my life. So, to the 4 or 5 men in the Pine Pass who tried to get into a car with 2 kids, I hope I ran at least one of your feet over. Back just before the pandemic, I traveled a lot for work, spending a good amount of time in lots of different airports, lots of different hotels. I was pretty used to this type of lifestyle, and being for work, most places I stayed were relatively inviting and nice. Most places. This story's about the other one, the one that, for lack of a better explanation, was haunted, at least part of it. So, it was back in 2018, The trip was from Boise, Idaho, to Hilton Head, South Carolina. 3 days, in and out. I was familiar with South Carolina, as my job sent me there a lot. But Hilton Head was new for me, and this hotel was a new one for me. It wasn't my usual, but it was really nice. Honest first thoughts when I arrived were sweet. I eventually figure out how to get my rental car to the parking garage after checking in with the hotel. I realize that it's incredibly far away from the hotel's actual entrance. But for the moment, I'm just concerned about finding a spot to park, somewhere close to the elevators and stairs. The first thing I notice when I actually park is how dead this hotel parking garage is. For a Sunday night, it seemed like maybe I was the only one around. I parked and saw signs near the elevator that said something about a pedestrian bridge. I remember stepping out of the car quickly, but stopping in my tracks just as quickly, the car door in a position of almost closed, aside from my hand holding it. But I hadn't gotten that far. I'd stopped because I heard someone whistle. I was especially startled because the whistle didn't seem to echo the way that something would in this type of structure. It sounded as though it was right next to me, in my car even. I couldn't be sure, so I froze. After moments of hearing nothing but a very distant symphony of bugs, I officially closed the door to the car. The rental's key was one of those that wasn't an actual key, aka nothing to hold between the knuckles. But I wasn't even sure I needed to worry about that. It just felt eerie. I contemplated leaving my bag, coming back for it early in the AM, but decided last minute, fuck it. I opened the trunk, grabbed my bag, and still tried to make my way as quickly as possible toward the sign that I'd seen. I approached the elevator and read the sign instructing me to go up one floor to the pedestrian bridge, or continue up a small stairway to the ground floor and catch a shuttle. Dear God, how big was this place? I opted to do the whole pedestrian thing because it was a long flight and I was ready to stretch my legs before bed. I hit the button, and as soon as the doors close, I feel I'm not alone. Immediately following the feeling, I hear a long exhale. And then I feel stale breath on the right side of my neck. What I see, it's more like what I can't see. I can literally only describe it as seeing Hollow Man. If you don't know the reference, all I ask is that you look it up to understand, because the moment I saw this thing in this elevator, I thought of that movie, and not in a fun nostalgia way. I was terrified. It's like this invisible force that doesn't feel invisible. The elevator doors open. I run out of there, dragging my suitcase, not giving myself time to allow the wheels to be useful. I get to the pedestrian bridge, still dragging everything along toward the doors. I'm so anxious I can't even think about the fact that I need a key card to open the doors. When they're locked, I sort of panic. And then I hear something familiar, sounding like it's right next to me. A whistle. I whip my head around, but I see nothing. No one. Anywhere. I recall the key card in my purse that I'd gotten before driving to the garage. I grab it, swipe it, nothing. Swipe it, nothing. Now it feels like some sort of sick joke. I swipe it again and it works. As the doors close, I feel secure somehow. And now I'm looking for the thing that I saw in the elevator. I don't see it. And I don't see it again that whole trip. Granted, I didn't take the elevator again. I opted for the stairs, and I was always sure to park on the pedestrian level, so that it was a straight shot to the bridge. I did, however, hear that whistle again. It was my last night. I was about to get into my car. I heard that same whistle, but I didn't get that same feeling I had in the elevator. It wasn't negative, just strange. It made me think back to the first time I'd heard the whistle. I was a little unnerved, but it wasn't the scary part. For some reason, I think I encountered not just one of the unknown, but possibly two separate entities, together in one space. If I had to put money on which possibly meant harm, elevator Hollow Man, for sure. So, anyone else have any weird stories from the area? I have to go back to Hilton Head next spring. Ironically, I've only become more interested in the paranormal since this experience. Before this, I truly wouldn't have had an opinion either way on ghosts and such. But now, I think I really want to stay there again. Maybe even try to catch some footage or bring someone with me who knows what they're doing. Because that place, that structure specifically, it's definitely haunted. Well, friends, it appears we've reached the end of tonight's episode. But don't miss a brand new one every Friday night. Thank you to those who shared their stories, and a big thank you to all of you for listening. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to The Darkest Hour, and tap the bell so you never miss a thing. I sure do appreciate it and can't thank you enough. Huge shout out to all of my patrons for their unwavering support. MISANTHROPIA, Monica L., The Dark Cosmos, Zoe Watt, Shelly B., Rat Girl, Alicia S., and a big welcome to The Darkest Hour's newest VIP patron, Shane Q. Remember, if you want to support The Darkest Hour in other ways, consider joining my Patreon. Check out patreon.com/thedarkesthour, or click the link in the description to learn more. You can keep up with me and all things Darkest Hour over on my Instagram, @thedarkesthouryt, or if you prefer a more quiet time, follow me on Twitter, @AmandaJaneTDH. Do you have stories like these? I'd love to share them. Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com, or on the Darkest Hour subreddit, The Darkest Hour YT. Stay spooky.